What is the creepiest thing you saw despite being skeptical of the paranormal? I was about 10 years old when my friend and I went to say hello to his mum, who was working as a barmaid in one of the local pubs. The pub was built in 1461, so it has quite a bit of history. After saying hello to his mum, we went to leave and noticed the cellar door was open. Being curious 10-year-olds and out of earshot of any adults, we decided to sneak down and have a cheeky look around. When we got down there, it was pretty much what you'd expect, lots of barrels of booze and storage for other bits and pieces. But suddenly we heard an "excuse me" from behind us. We spun around and saw a lady standing in the cellar. She told us, "You shouldn't be down here," and said we should go back upstairs quickly. We did as we were told, and as we were exiting the cellar, we were caught red-handed by the landlord of the pub. He asked what we were doing down there. We explained that we just wanted to see what was in the cellar, but that the lady had told us to go back upstairs. He looked a little confused and asked, "What lady?" before heading down into the cellar himself. A few minutes passed, and when he came back he told us, there was nobody down there, and said we should stop messing around. After that, we left the building to go and do other things. The thing I remember most clearly is that the lady was dressed in an old-fashioned maid's outfit, the kind you'd see in a British Victorian period drama. I also remember that she didn't feel threatening or scary at all. If anything, she seemed kind and gentle. I messaged my friend about this a few weeks ago, 26 years later, and he remembered it clearly too. I've heard several people talk about a maid or servant who either fell or was pushed down the cellar stairs and broke her neck. So, in conclusion, it was either the ghost of a Victorian servant, or the landlord was doing something kinky with someone in the cellar and we showed up at a very inconvenient time. I wouldn't say it was creepy, more like strange. When I was a kid, we had a rocking chair in my room that was extremely comfortable. I needed it there because I regularly had very bad night terrors, and my parents would come in and calm me down by rocking me to sleep in it. This eventually became a nightly routine, and my parents were clearly very tired from it, even though they always said it was all right. One night I woke up, presumably from another night terror, and instead of my parents being by my bed, there was an old woman I had never seen before sitting in the rocking chair, gently rocking. She had a faint soft green glow around her. She was dressed in very typical grandmother-style clothing and, most notably, she was wearing a necklace made of jade beads. She gestured for me to come over and sit with her. Even though I was still a kid who had just woken up from a night terror, I wasn't afraid of her at all. I joined her, and she rocked the chair and hummed for a while. I am deaf, but I could feel the vibrations of the humming. Eventually, I went back to bed and she pulled the covers over me. She kept appearing every night for quite a while, and it was always the same routine. Sometimes she wore different clothes, but she always had the jade necklace on. Eventually my night terrors started to fade, so I only saw her occasionally. Looking back now, I realize how strange this must have seemed to my parents. For a long time I had been waking them up every single night because of my night terrors, and then suddenly, one night, I stopped needing them at all. One night my parents came into the room while I was in the middle of walking toward the rocking chair with the old woman. They asked me what I was doing. When I looked back at the chair, there was no one there. She appeared a few more times after that, but for the most part my night terrors had completely stopped, and eventually she stopped showing up. Years later, when I was 18, my parents were showing me old family photos. At one point I noticed a photograph that had the same rocking chair in it. I was shocked to see that the old woman was sitting in the chair in the photo. It turned out that the rocking chair had belonged to my grandmother's grandmother, and the woman in the photograph was her. What really unsettled me was when my parents told me that she always wore a necklace made of jade beads, that she was usually found sitting in that rocking chair, and that she had been known as a very motherly person. While I don't generally believe in anything supernatural, I can't ignore the fact that there was no way I could have seen her before. Yet I had imagined her exactly as she looked, including the details about the jade necklace. My aunt once told me a story about her and her siblings all sharing the same experience while sleeping in 3 separate rooms. One day we were driving through the town where she had gone to school. As we passed a particular house, I commented on how bad it looked from the outside. She replied, "It's even worse inside. That place is haunted." I had never heard my aunt talk about anything paranormal before, and I haven't heard her mention anything like that since. She told me that she and her siblings had rented a sketchy old house while they were studying there. According to her, strange little things would happen that made them uncomfortable, but nothing too extreme. For example, they would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and find their blankets pulled completely off and lying at the foot of the bed. Of course, that kind of thing can happen if someone kicks the blankets off while sleeping, so they didn't think too much of it. But one night something far stranger happened. My aunt said she was dreaming that she was falling and trying to grab onto something to stop herself. Suddenly she realized she wasn't dreaming at all. She was actually being pulled by the ankles out of her bed. She grabbed onto the rails of the headboard, holding on as tightly as she could. After a few terrifying moments, she finally managed to scream. At that exact same moment, she heard screams coming from her siblings' rooms. Just as suddenly as it started, the pulling sensation stopped. She ran out of her room to check on them, and they all described the exact same experience. Each of them felt like something had been dragging them out of their beds by the ankles. Needless to say, they moved out of that house not long after and never looked back. My roommate had lost her cat. Next to where we lived there was an old empty house that also belonged to our landlord. We were allowed to use the space for parties and things like that, so we were very familiar with the house and all of its rooms. It was about 1 in the morning, and she was panicking about the cat, so I offered to help her look for it. We thought the cat might have gotten into the empty house, so we went inside with a flashlight. My friend told me she thought she had heard meowing coming from the house earlier, so we started searching. We eventually reached the hallway, and that's when we saw something strange. There was a ladder standing right in the middle of the hallway, leading up to an attic. The attic entrance was just a hole in the ceiling above us. The thing is, I had explored that house many times before. I had gone through every room, but I had never once seen an attic there. That alone felt really strange. Normally I'm the kind of person who gets curious about things like that. Usually I'd say something like, "Oh, an attic. Let's go up and check it out." But this time it was different. The moment I saw that ladder, my stomach turned. The ladder had never been there before. None of us even knew there was an attic in that house. And it couldn't have been squatters, because the house was literally in the backyard of where we lived. I had a really bad feeling about it. The ladder looked strangely inviting. Almost too inviting. I told my friend that her cat probably wasn't up there and that we should just leave. As we walked back toward the door, she said, "You know, I really thought I heard meowing coming from up there earlier." But in the end, we both chickened out and decided not to check. We walked out of the house and went back to our place. And guess who was sitting right at the front door? Her cat. Ever since that night, some strange things have happened to me, mostly around the parking lot connected to the garden behind that house. At first, I thought I saw a black figure walking by one day, but I brushed it off. A few days later, I was walking through the parking lot when suddenly I heard someone breathing right behind my neck. I thought it was one of my roommates trying to scare me. But when I turned around, there was nobody there. I experienced what I would describe as mild poltergeist activity throughout my teenage years. I would hear voices, knocking, and footsteps when nobody else was around. Sometimes objects would randomly slide off desks or fall from cupboards. Doors would slam even though there were no drafts in the house. There were also strange smells, especially strong perfumes that nobody in my family used, which would occasionally appear in my bedroom. When I was doing janitorial work late at night at my parents' church, I would sometimes hear what sounded like glass being thrown and shattering. Other times I heard whistling or singing, and even piano music coming from the chapel on the other side of the building. All of it stopped once I moved away from home. None of my family members ever experienced any of these things, which makes me think it may have been something psychosomatic, possibly connected to the anxiety I felt about my home life at the time. Still, back then I was completely convinced that I was being haunted. I guess none of those experiences really count as something I actually saw, unless you include objects sliding off desks. But the creepiest thing I ever saw happened when I was 16. I went on a community service trip to Minnesota with my youth group. While we were there, we were staying in a very large church. One night the group decided to play sardines. At one point, all of us except one person had already gathered together in the hiding spot, waiting for the last guy to find us. It went on for so long that the group eventually sent me out to go look for him, because we had heard someone walking up and down the hallways near us several times. They chose me because I'm pretty quick and agile, so they figured I would catch him quickly. I started running around the building, trying to listen for his footsteps. The place was almost completely dark, except for a few emergency lights in each hallway. After a while, I finally heard someone moving and ran after him. I caught a glimpse of him walking around a corner. I followed him immediately, but when I turned the corner he was gone. I kept moving down the hallway and started heading toward the top floor, because there was a stairwell at the end. Then I saw him again, walking into the room where we were all sleeping. I went inside, called out to him, and turned on the lights. There was nobody there. I ran out of the room as fast as I could and started searching the building again. Eventually I found the guy on the first floor, on the opposite side of the entire building. He was asleep on a pile of pillows. When I woke him up, he told me he had fallen asleep about 45 minutes earlier. To this day, I have absolutely no idea who I kept seeing walking through those hallways or entering our room. After I told everyone what had happened, we moved all of our sleeping bags to a different part of the church. Most of us didn't sleep at all that night. Only once in my life have I ever had what I would call a paranormal experience. When I was younger, I used to go with my mom and dad to the Sonoma coast to catch abalone. While my dad would climb down a steep cliff to go scuba diving for them, I would stay up above with my mom because the climb was too dangerous for someone my age. I remember this moment like it happened yesterday, and the whole situation still freaks me out. On this particular trip, my mom decided to climb down the cliff and told me to stay where I was while she grabbed a few seashells to show me. It usually only took a minute or two to climb down. I sat there waiting for her, sitting cross-legged right near the edge of the cliff and looking out over the ocean. Then suddenly I heard a moaning sound that seemed to come from just a few feet behind me. As a kid, I felt completely paralyzed. I slowly turned my head while still sitting there, and the moment I saw what was behind me my entire body froze. In my head I was panicking, but I couldn't even scream. Standing there was a frail old man who was completely bleached white. His clothes, his hair, even his eyes all seemed pale. He was extremely skinny, to the point where his face looked like it was almost cracking. Everything about him looked worn and tattered. I blinked and quickly turned back toward the ocean, thinking to myself, what the hell is happening? I must be imagining this. But when I looked back again, he was even closer. This time his hand was stretched out, reaching toward me like he was trying to grab me. Just when I thought he was about to touch me, my mom suddenly appeared at the top of the cliff and called out to me, asking me to come look at the shells she had found. My heart was racing, but I was just relieved that she was back. I told my parents what I had seen, but they brushed it off and didn't take it seriously. After that day, I never wanted to go back to that place again because of how terrified I had been. The crazy thing is that even now I still remember exactly what that old man looked like. And there's one more strange detail. About a year later, my dad went back there with his best friend and my uncle. Unfortunately, that was the last time he ever saw his friend. He got caught in an undertow and drowned. In high school and college, I had a summer job cleaning my former elementary school at night. The building is pretty old, originally built in the 1890s, and people always said it was haunted. I never really believed in that kind of thing. Most nights I cleaned either completely alone or with one other person who worked on the opposite side of the building, so I would basically be by myself for most of the shift. For the first 2 years, nothing happened that made me think the place was haunted. Then came my 3rd year. One night I was cleaning a series of classrooms that lined a very long hallway. My coworker was doing some deep cleaning in the kitchen on the complete opposite end of the building, far enough away that I wouldn't be able to hear anything he was doing. We were the only 2 people inside. All the doors were locked. It was around 9 at night. It was a hot summer evening, and the hallways tended to get very warm. I had a fan set up at the end of the hallway, propped up against one of the fire doors. These were extremely heavy fire doors that were normally held open by strong magnets. They only closed if the fire alarm went off or if someone physically pulled them off the magnets on purpose. They didn't close accidentally. And if they did close, they were incredibly loud. There was no way they could shut quietly. At one point I was inside a classroom emptying the trash. Everything was completely quiet. I stepped out of the room to throw the trash into my large rolling trash cart, and suddenly I noticed that the left fire door was closed. I had heard absolutely nothing. What made it even stranger was the position of the fan. If that door had somehow shut, it would have pushed the fan forward, probably knocking it over or at least unplugging it. But when I walked over to open the door again, the fan was still sitting exactly where I had left it. It hadn't been pushed forward, it hadn't tipped over, and it was still plugged in and running. I'm fairly certain that should have been physically impossible, because the door had been leaning against the fan to keep it steady. That was the first strange thing. The second happened about a week later. This time I was completely alone in the building. Again, every door was locked, and it was around 9 or 10 at night, already dark outside. I walked into the choir room and turned on the lights. When the lights came on, I could see my reflection in the window. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that there appeared to be a man standing behind me. I had never seen him before. I nearly jumped out of my skin and spun around, yelling, "You're not supposed to be here." But there was nobody there. I immediately called my boss, and he came over right away with his son. The 3 of us searched the entire building together, opening every door and checking every room. We didn't find anyone. So the possibilities, as I see them, are these. Either ghosts exist. Or I somehow hallucinated for a brief moment for no reason, and it never happened again. I wasn't sleep deprived either. I had slept about 9 hours the night before. Or someone had broken into the building, managed to disappear silently in the few seconds it took me to turn around, avoided us while we searched the entire place, and somehow slipped back out without being seen. All 3 possibilities are terrifying.